Hi everyone, it's Pampador here to talk with you about a subject that's at once terrifying and fascinating: the apocalypse. Well, not the apocalypse itself, but apocalyptic literature. Now, the term apocalypse comes from the Greek for to uncover or to reveal. In fact, that's why the apocalypse shows up in the Bible in the book of Revelations. So, why would an apocalypse be connected to Revelations? What does it reveal? Well, there are lots of ways to approach that question. What do you think an apocalyptic scenario would reveal? In a sense, an apocalypse is the death of a whole civilization, so it reveals on a different scale whatever we think an individual death might reveal. So, maybe the meaning of life? Whether or not there's anything beyond the life we live on Earth? Maybe what really matters in life? Now, people often lump in apocalyptic literature with dystopia because they're both within the realm of cautionary fiction that uses a very negative view of the future to prompt activism, or at least critical thought in its readers. So, what's the difference between dystopia and apocalypse? The answer to that is simple in my mind: government. A dystopia has a functioning government. It's a bad one, controlling its people through either pleasure or pain. And even in the case where it's all pleasure all the time, the novel shows the government to exist and to create a nightmare for its citizens, even if the citizens are not aware of that. An apocalypse is a time of chaos, spurred by some kind of disaster. There's no central leadership, no one in charge. It's the revelation. Who would you be if you lived outside the rules? If there were no rules? There are lots of ways to start an apocalypse, fictionally, and we will look briefly at 5 different ones. Each, of course, provides a caution against a specific element of today's society. The technological apocalypse asks us to look very carefully at the technology we're inviting into our lives. There are, understandably, plenty of apocalyptic narratives in which humans create artificial intelligence that develops far beyond the abilities of the humans and decides that it no longer needs its creators. There's a Warren Bennis quotation I really like on this anxiety. The factory of the future will have only 2 employees, a man and a dog. The man will be there to feed the dog. The dog will be there to keep the man from touching the equipment. We have apocalyptic narratives about all kinds of technological innovations that aren't clearly understood or used by the general population, from genetic engineering through nanotechnology. In my mind, though, some of the scariest apocalyptic novels are about techs we use every day. For example, William Forchant's 1 Second After narrates the story of a small town when the U.S. gets hit by an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, that closes down the electrical grid and all machines that count on electricity, including cars, for about 1 year. What would life be like without power? How prepared are we for this kind of disaster? Spoiler alert, Forchant thinks we are not at all prepared. So technological apocalypses can lead us to be really aware of the technologies we count on every day, like electricity or artificial intelligence. Or it can lead us to think about going further down technological paths in quantum computing or nanotechnology that we might not think about that often. Technological apocalypses can be combined with military apocalypses in which the existence of advanced weapons create a disastrous impact of military conflict. These apocalyptic narratives were especially popular during the Cold War, as they embodied the decades of constant anxiety about the detonation of 1 or more nuclear bombs. Although these are no longer the most popular form of apocalyptic narrative, they continue to be produced regularly, which makes sense since we continue to worry about exactly how various political conflicts will or will not be resolved. What has risen to take the place of the military apocalypse in terms of popularity is the environmental apocalypse. Obviously, the climate crisis is generally seen as the biggest existential threat to human life today. It thus makes perfect sense that the environmental apocalypse would be one way of grappling with this anxiety. We get environmental apocalypses of many kinds, ranging from the disaster movie genre with action heroes who kind of save the day, like The Day After Tomorrow, to quietly desperate novels like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is the best novel that I do not plan to reread. We also get cli-fi, climate fiction, that doesn't feature the apocalypse, like Kim Stanley Robinson's really interesting and bureaucratic The Ministry for the Future from 2020. I'm curious if non-apocalyptic cli-fi will ever be as popular as apocalyptic. Another apocalyptic genre that has gone in and out of favor but that always interests me is the supernatural apocalypse. What does it mean when the apocalypse is caused by a supernatural entity like vampires or zombies? What anxiety does that indicate? I'm not sure, but I have definitely seen texts like I Am Legend, the excellent 1954 novel by Richard Matheson, as well as, to a lesser degree, some of its film adaptations, address key anxieties around what it means to be human, how human resiliency and innovation can be brought to bear on even seemingly desperate situations. And then we have, of course, the apocalypse that's caused by a pandemic. These texts have, perhaps unsurprisingly, been enormously popular during our own COVID-19 pandemic. Why do people like to read about the pandemic apocalypse while experiencing a pandemic of enormous, if not species-destroying proportions? It's a good question. As is the question, should we read such novels at this time? Are they helpful or harmful? That's something I'd like you to keep in mind as we read and discuss Emily St. John Mandel's 2014 novel, Station 11. If you like pandemic novels, I will also recommend two of my personal favorites, Stephen King's The Stand from 1978 and Justin Cronin's The Passage from 2010. And yeah, if you're reading The Stand, go with the uncut edition. The abridged version is already over 800 pages, and once you've committed to reading something that long, you might as well just go for it. Now, The Stand is an apocalyptic novel, while The Passage is post-apocalyptic. This is something to consider if you ever want to write in the genre of apocalypse. Are you more interested in the moment of apocalypse, the chaos that reigns as society breaks down, or in some point after the apocalypse, when things have settled into some kind of new normal and characters can reflect on what the apocalypse has meant, what it has revealed? Post-apocalyptic novels can be set 1 year after the disaster, 20 years later, even 100 years later. This is a genre that allows for and even invites multi-generational storytelling. We see this, for example, in Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy. It also has great potential to investigate the radical transformation of its central characters. Would you be very different before and after the apocalypse? As you read apocalyptic fiction, keep an eye on how different writers think about that question. You will find that many post-apocalyptic novels employ the technique of flashback in order to narrate the apocalypse in some way, even if they're more interested in a time afterward. Keep an eye on how those transitions take place. Are they smooth or jarring? Do you prefer the apocalyptic passages or the post-apocalyptic? Why? This is definitely something to watch as you read Station 11. If you have already read this novel, you won't be surprised to find it's one of my personal favorite post-apocalyptic novels. It's beautifully written by a Canadian and set partly in Canada. But more importantly for me, this is a novel that really grapples with the role of art in the apocalypse. How important is art to that big question that all speculative fiction always thinks about? What does it mean to be human? Is art a luxury or a need when we answer that question? I'd like to leave you with some more questions that you can ask yourselves as you read and think about Station 11. Is this novel more hopeful or despairing? Do you prefer the apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic portions? How does Arthur Leander function in this novel? How does this resemble or differ from other apocalyptic novels or movies that you have consumed? Would this make a good movie? How about a TV show? Why or why not? And then finally, what is the purpose of art in this novel, but also in utopian, dystopian, or apocalyptic literature in general? Happy reading!